So hello, Mark. Before we start, I want to introduce myself. My name is Avi Itzkovich. I am the founder of UX Salon, and we're here on UX on Coffee, which basically means we both have coffees here. Good morning. You're in Texas, right?
And yeah, Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. And the format is simple. We're having coffee. When the coffee runs out, the conversation is over. Basically discussing casual conversation about UX. And the reason I wanted to talk to you, by the way, cheers. Let's do it officially.
Cheers.
Great. You are very well branded.
Yes, we have all kinds of little tchotchkes.
So Mark,
the little octopus translates easily to things.
Looks good. Mark Rolston is the founder of Argodesign. And he's coming to Tel Aviv for UX Salon 2017 to speak about, the title of your conversation is Form Follows Me.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about that.
The title was sort of playing with the design trope, form follows function. I'm sure most of us have heard of that. If you think about sort of the history of product design, the idea of form follows function emerged out of the classical tradition of design being very much a craft, right? The individual designer responding to the problem in front of them with a form of craftsmanship, and you saw lots of sort of this fancy detailing that was more or less just the desire of an individual to sort of decorate the problem. And form follows function was a sort of a strict response that said the design is truly a story about what the product does, and that carried us through the 20th century pretty well. My previous boss at Frog Design, so I don't know if people here know, I spent 20 years at Frog Design, and for the last almost 10 years I was the chief creative officer, but I worked for Hartmut Esslinger, who in the 20th century was one of the more famous industrial designers, and Hartmut established an ethos that he called form follows emotion, which was meant to describe the break from the tradition of form follows function, where products were not merely functional expressions, but were emotional conveyances. They carried history, they carried personal meaning, they carried all sorts of other emotional attributes that allowed us to sort of love a product or think of it as beautiful or cute or funny, things that were beyond just that it did something. And that was a great, I think, story for many years. For maybe 30 years, that described what was propelling thinking within the product design industry. And it carried us in a lot of ways into the design of software products. So I really think of hardware and software products following more or less a continuum rather than being two wholly distinct fields. There's some differences that really should respect, but I think we refer to it best as a continuous field. And so today, kind of looking at that idea of form follows emotion, I really think it's breaking down and becoming less of an important driver than a new phenomenon. So I think we're all out there kind of trying to put our stake in what is happening in product. And for me, what it looks like is with the advent of such depth in personal data and artificial intelligence or other sort of softer forms of that becoming really the underlying reasoning and the underlying driver of a product's newness, what makes it different than older products. And so many products are about accelerating, building the me up, right? As Facebook as a product is all about me, or you, or anyone else. Even personal products, the phone is sort of an extension of yourself. So all these things that we now are building are really about us in a lot of ways, and they extend us as opposed to being just these sort of separate devices that we go and use for a very discrete task like a toaster. Instead, they are truly and emotionally and almost factually extensions of us. So I think the idea now is form follows me, and the more we understand that and sort of take that apart, I think the more we understand where product design is going, and so I will come to Tel Aviv and talk more about this, but I think that's one of the most important trends and ideas in design today.
So form follows me, but you say, but there's also the meta me.
Yeah. So yeah. First of all, you're gonna figure this out. And myself and a few of the folks that I work with, we're very much about taking certain ideas and trying to give them an embodiment, meaning sort of a quick, simple way to refer to them. So there's lots of these little ideas that are bite-sized. Because there are so many complex things happening in the industry, I think boiling them down to something that you can talk about quickly is helpful. So meta-me is a concept, simply an idea, to help describe this phenomena about the changing relationship we have with things. So it's really what you might call the sort of primary driver of this idea of form follows me. So a meta-me is a way of describing what happens when I myself, which is a human being, and the sort of immutable nature of what it means to be a human is thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years old, right? Very old idea about the self. And we become more and more accustomed to thinking about our lives and our independence, especially over the last 20th century. We've written a lot about it, we've thought a lot about it, philosophy as a field has grown, and so we understand what it means to think of the self, okay? We could spend hours on that, but we won't. Alongside that phenomena is this very, very recent idea of really, really rich expressions about us. So I'll start with that keyword, about us, that are digital, right? So Facebook has hundreds of data points that they store that describe what they know about us. We live a sort of second life online through a vehicle like Facebook. Many, many other thousands of data sources are built up that are able to describe us. So in a lot of ways, there's sort of a digital version of us emerging online and becoming not simply this sort of side reference like height, age, weight, but truly rich enough to be important to talk about. And I think we're crossing this threshold over the last few years and the coming next years ahead of us, where those two collide into this inseparable notion of what it means to be yourself, to be a person. And I refer to that as the meta-me. And what I mean by that is, today, if you separate yourself from this digital phenomena, you think, well, I make decisions based on what I know and my opinions and my passions, right? And that helps me decide, should I eat this? Should I marry that person? Should I do anything that I might have choice in life? You know, this is really philosophical, but I think it's quite pragmatic when it comes to designing a product, so I'll try and get back to that. Today, what's happening is more and more of those decisions I might make are compounded or aided or empowered by the digital side of myself and others. So I don't necessarily just drive around in a city based on my own independent knowledge. I drive based on the advice of a machine that sits with me. That's part, in a lot of ways, part of me. It's inseparable almost, my little phone and its advice. And driving directions are a simple example. In fact, I was in Phoenix a couple of days ago, and I was in an Uber car with a driver, and I asked him to drive me to Intel, and he's like, "Oh, I used to work there." I was like, "Okay, I know exactly where that is." He tells me that he knows exactly where it is, but then he immediately types up the address, and he starts driving, and the address online, for some reason, Google Maps has got it wrong. And he's driving around and continuing to follow these directions online and just stumped out beyond belief. And we're getting late. And I'm like, "You said you know where it is." He's like, "Oh, yeah." So he kind of puts the phone away and he just drives immediately there. And it's this amazing reminder that in a lot of ways, we've sort of given over a huge part of our own sense of independence and our ability to think to digital systems. If a map says this is the right way, it's getting harder and harder to sort of emotionally challenge that. Right? Well, it says it's right. We found this phenomena here in the United States in the most recent election, where people found the most incredulous claims hard to disbelieve because they were there, they were in print, and well, it says it's true, it says it's happening, and so this idea of the truth and notions of independence of thought are very new, recent phenomena because we are less and less independently operating from the machines that are part of us. So when I think about, so this is back to sort of being a designer rather than some kind of philosopher, I think about the design of these products that are additional elements, not only that help us, but have become essentially part of us. I think the way a customer takes those in is less now the way they would think about a toaster as sort of a tool, and more emotionally as an extension of themselves. And so the kind of decisions that that go through their heads, the kind of importance they may place in that device change. And so, I don't have all the answers there, but to me, I think it's a really important new way of thinking about products as truly extensions of who we are, as opposed to sort of the old style of tool sets. And the Echo is a good example. My kids call it a she. They don't think of it as it. They think of it as her. And so it's almost like another character in the room, as opposed to another tool. It sits actually literally next to the toaster. But those are very different things.
But you said, I think you said that when I saw a talk of you, you said that sometimes the real me is kind of disturbing the meta me. There's a difference, or maybe I read it somewhere. But how do we like in design? How do we know where like how to design for who?
I don't think we know the answer yet. I think what I'm trying to do is raise the argument that these two things are in conflict, that they're evolving, the relationship between the two. We used to have a very comfortable relationship with the world of tools around us. And even though over the 20th century the tools got better and better and better, we still easily call them tools. Even the early cell phone, as miraculous as they were compared to, like a hammer, they were still a tool, a sophisticated tool. Mm-hmm. But today, like I said earlier, I think they're crossed over to another sort of thing, and they're now emotionally an extension of ourselves. And we are getting to a point where I think, like we just talked about, the idea of whose decision, whose idea about something, like the right way to get somewhere, should be prominent. Here's an interesting idea that sort of we can play with. Have you noticed with LinkedIn the idea that it says happy birthday or congratulations for you to other people?
Okay.
So that's just a simple example. It's a really tiny little bit of code where it's LinkedIn has decided to write the message happy birthday, but it really challenges the idea of what it means for two people to talk to each other, because I'm now looking at happy birthdays and congratulations on my phone from a friend, and now questioning, well, did he write that, or did his computer write that? Did his meta-me say happy birthday, or did the actual person say happy birthday? And it's getting harder and harder to decipher the difference between those two things. There's a funny old play, a French story about a character called Cyrano de Bergerac, where Cyrano hides. He essentially hides. Well, okay, more complicated story. Cyrano is kind of an ugly dude. He's got a big old long nose, but he's really witty. He's great with his words. And he's in love with this woman, Roxanne. Well, so is this other guy named Christian. But Christian he's gorgeous, but he's an idiot. And so Christian's in love with Roxanne, but he can't speak to her. He can barely form any cohesive sentences. So he enlists Cyrano to hide in the bushes and tell him what to say. So he's up there trying to talk to Roxanne, and he's like, what do I say? And Cyrano gives him a line, and he delivers that line, and she falls in love with him. And of course, at the end of the story, Cyrano is really disappointed in that. But I think the analogy is perfect in the sense that we are more and more often getting these little assistants that can sit next to us and tell us the right thing to say. I mean, a conversation like this could be purely driven by a computer assistant sitting with me and giving me all sorts of clever stories
Why
to
do you
share
think
with
why do you think I have earphones? I'm listening to the questions. Yes, no.
Yes. Yeah. How do you know it's me? So it does, as these things mature, it draws into question who we are, and are we, when I'm impressed by someone, am I impressed by them, or am I impressed by their ability to tap into Google and the world of other people's ideas?
Do you think it's coming? I mean, that's where the world is going, where like I'm going to chat with someone, a friend, and he's going to, like, a robot will fill in for him. Maybe he's busy.
Absolutely. It is. This is why I pointed out the simple example from LinkedIn. If you use a new chat tool from Google called Allo, it notices the shorthand that you might say, like, "Hey, what's up?" or "How you doing?" Any little turn of phrase that you continue to use, and it matches those with other text that's coming in from the other side, from the other party. And so before you've had a chance to respond, if it sees a phrase from your friend, it recommends a series of possible phrases for you to write back. So it's saying, you should say this. Now, at some point, it gets so good that the two of you might be having a conversation that neither of you is truly contributing to. Now, I'm sure that conversation will hollow out pretty fast, but the fact that such a thing can happen now is telling, and it only takes a small number of advances in this tech for that to get more profoundly interesting. So yeah, I don't think it's coming. I know it's coming.
You're in a position to hire people, and actually the main theme of this conference this year is the chatbots and voice interfaces and designing conversation. The question is, where do we direct ourselves if we want to, like, if there's a person trying to get into this business? What's the future of this profession, in your opinion? What should we focus on?
Well, I wouldn't worry about it just quite yet. I remember when I was getting into this business, it was the late 80s, early 90s, and there was no concrete definition of a user interface designer. In fact, what there were a bunch of old school HCI people. They called them HCI folks. And what they really were people who tested the success or failure rate of someone trying to operate a task in a computer, which tended to be a very restrictive notion. And those folks were awful for the industry at the time because they were just incredibly restrictive. So the few of us who were sort of emerging in the field were largely kind of graphic people or hacking style people, just sort of tinkerers. We just ignored all that and ignored the notion of it as a profession and more of as a sort of a task level problem. And we brought to it the passions we had, and over time, the idea of an interaction designer evolved. It didn't take too long, but it took a little sort of a shakeout that there was this very visual problem that had emerged, which really wasn't there before. And the idea of interaction had become open-ended enough that it wasn't a strict task. Interaction before had been very sort of strict, given that the options you had for solving a problem were limited. So today we have things like voice, and so here we have interaction designers whittling away at that, visual designers sort of stepping away from drawing pictures and thinking more about overall scenarios. And we're sort of hacking at the problem. over time, yeah, I think we'll get the idea of a script writer today, someone who is very focused on a writing task, but not the writing in prose that normally writing is associated with, but writing in dialogue form, and using that to discern sort of the discreteness of command structures, the taxonomy of a dialogue, and maybe the ontology of talking to things. All of that becomes a new art form, I think, and it probably emerges out of interaction design. But like I said, I wouldn't worry about it too much in that it will organically define itself. The more important thing is that all of us sort of open our minds to what is changing and the nature of that change. Right. So to me, that's why I spend so much time and open up what would be a normally discussion about a bunch of user interface issues with almost very philosophically sounding topics, because I think that's the way you look at the problem right now until it becomes obvious enough, ordinary enough, that we now then get to the question, who does what? And I went through the earlier phase when, before the web, we were trying to figure out how to design interfaces on just about every emerging platform. I survived that time and survived in it. I succeeded in it. And so I think that same strategy probably works out today.
All right. Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure speaking with you. I'm really looking forward to see you here on March 19 at Tel Aviv, at UX Salon. Don't hang up, but we're going to say goodbye to our viewers. So, bye, everyone.
You.
Thank you for listening.
Take care.